Jun Seok Yeo wasn't able to earn a rotation spot in year one, and with a crowded roster already set for next season, it's fair to wonder what his future looks like in Spokane.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today is the second in our season in review series, discussing every player on Gonzaga's roster, talking about their season last year, talking about their best and worst case scenarios, which we laid out before the season, talking about how we did in those projections, and then also talking about each player's individual future in Spokane or beyond. We did our first season review episode on Wednesday, talking about Anton Watson. Today, we are closing out the week talking about Jun Seok Yeo. We're going to start talking about his history. So Yeo was a surprise addition to Gonzaga's roster, not this past season, but the year prior to that. He showed up at the mid-season, the semester break in the 2022-23 season. There was just pictures of him on the internet, and it was like, hey, there's a player working out for Gonzaga on the court. Who is that? We finally got some intel, some information that, he was Jun Seok Yeo, that he was coming over from South Korea. He'd been playing college basketball in Korea prior to coming to Spokane, joining that Gonzaga team. Now, he did not play in that 22-23 season, and that was the plan. He wasn't eligible to participate right away. He was just basically with the team, enrolled in classes, hanging out, kind of getting a lay of the land in the United States in Spokane with that Gonzaga program, had the rest of that season to be on the sidelines kind of observing, spent the entire off season with Gonzaga getting ready for his first opportunity to play for the team coming into last year's 23-24 season. And his previous experience made him a really tantalizing prospect. I mean, not only was he 6'8", big-bodied guy, older than a typical first-year player. He was played most of last season at 21 years of age. He'd previously played, like I said, at Korea University. He had experience in the FIBA tournament as well. He played against Chet Holmgren in that U19 tournament and put up monstrous numbers for South Korea. Now, the South Korea team was not very good, and Yeo was kind of their only good player, really. He was getting the majority of the shot attempts. It was one of those situations where judging his numbers was kind of difficult because he was kind of the focal point offensively, the only guy really doing anything for that team. But knowing that he had that kind of talent level, had that size that Mark Few and the Zags had invested in and brought him across the country or across the world to come play for this team, there was a lot of kind of excitement coming into this 23-24 season. What is his role going to look like? How raw is he going to be? Is he a 2-year guy, a 3-year guy? Is he a player who dominates in his first year and puts up huge numbers and goes to the NBA? Like, we really spent a lot of last summer kind of waffling on what is that going to look like? What is that role going to be for him in year one? And the general expectation, and we'll hear a little bit from a recording I did back in November, October, talking about Yeo. The consensus as we got close to the start of the season was, well, he's probably not going to be a big role player in year one. The expectation was that it's going to be a slower development process, similar to not only what the Zags have did with Rui Hachimura, but also guys like, Martinez Arlauskas and various other international recruits this year, Luka Krajinovic and Pavle Stosic as well, where they really don't get a lot of playing time in year one, and they're just kind of learning and developing and growing behind the scenes. And what it creates is a situation where it's a little bit harder to know what that future is going to look like, because the growth and the development was stuff that we didn't see. So we don't know exactly what that looked like. And so coming into this year was kind of hey, he's been in the program for 9, 10 months now. He's been around the team, around the coaching staff. And so what is that going to lead to in terms of how productive he is this year? And we knew, Graham Ike and Anton Watson and Ben Gregg were going to have big roles. We expected Braden Huff to have a big role. Obviously, the Steele Venters injury changed things a little bit, and there was the expectation that maybe Yeo would step into a bigger role. And frankly, it just didn't happen. Yeo played 25 games for Gonzaga in his first season with the Bulldogs. He made one start. He averaged just under 7 minutes per night. So he didn't even play every night. And when he did play, it was pretty sparingly. The majority of his minutes came in garbage time situations late in the second half against opponents that Gonzaga had huge leads on. He finished the season averaging 2.3 points, 1.2 rebounds, 0.2 steals, and 0.2 assists, and 0.2 blocks per game. Percentages, it's a small sample size, so the numbers are a bit wonky. He was just under 71% on two-pointers, an incredibly efficient 17 of 24 on two-point shots. A lot of those were in transition. He wasn't taking a lot of two-point shots outside of easy lay-ins around the rim. He was not a good three-point shooter. Again, the sample size is very small. He took 22 three-point attempts, only made 3 of them. That's good for just under 14%. He also went 14 of 21, about 67% from the free throw line as well. And the thing for Yeo is that he never got consistent minutes. He began the year playing more often early in the year against the SWAC opponents, the Mississippi Valley States, the Eastern Oregons. And then as the year went on, the playing time kind of just started to dry up for him. He had 10 or more minutes played in a game 6 times. All of those came before January 6th. After January 18th through the end of the season, he only played in 10 games, and he played 4 minutes per game, about 40 total minutes played from January 18th until the end of the year. Some of his best performances, Eastern Oregon, again, this is an NAIA school, so not even Division III level basketball. Against NAIA, Yeo had 9.7 boards, 4 assists. He had a career-high 10 points and 4 rebounds against Arkansas Pine Bluff. But again, as the year went on, the playing time just disappeared. The Zags made some adjustments, started Ben Gregg, brought Dusty Stromer off the bench. That kind of changed the rotation a little bit. But towards the end of the year, there was a lot of conversation about where is Yeo? Like, is he going to play even in these games that Gonzaga's up 15, 18, 20? Like, we weren't seeing him, or we were seeing him at the very, very end of the game, like coming in the final 90 seconds where there's only even like one possession where you even get an attempt at a shot before you're just holding the basketball and letting the clock run out. And Yeo had just 6 total points from February on. That's it. Now, 4 of those 6 points came in the NCAA tournament because he had 2 points against McNeese State, 2 points against Kansas. That says less about Yeo like getting into those games as much as it says that Gonzaga just won those games by a big enough margin that they were able to play some of their deeper reserves, which is the role that Yeo was occupying at the end of the season. So what does that mean for Yeo? How did this season compare to our preseason expectations? Was this a worst case scenario for the 6'8" forward? We're going to talk more about that. We're going to hear from Andy from the past. We're going to play a 2-minute clip from an old episode in November looking at the best and worst case scenarios for Yeo. And we're going to assess that and kind of what it means for him going forward. All that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, eBay Motors. Folks, passion, drive, and patience, that's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts to choose from for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your car every time, or you get your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that W. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, folks, for those of you who hung out with us for the Anton Watson Season in Review episode on Wednesday, you know that we played a clip from an old episode to get a sense of what we were kind of anticipating, expecting as the best and worst case scenarios coming into the season. We have another clip here. It's about 2.5 minutes long. It's from an episode back in late October of 2023, giving us an insight into what we thought were the best and worst case scenarios for Yeo coming into his first season at Gonzaga. We're going to play that, and we're going to talk about where he kind of landed. Was it the best case scenario? Was it the worst case scenario? And then we'll get into what it means for his future. So here's this clip, 2.5 minutes from Andy in October. Really, the best case scenario for Yeo is a huge year of growth and development. And a lot of that is going to happen behind the scenes. We're probably not going to know if the 23-24 season was a quote-unquote best case scenario for Jun Seok Yeo until a couple years from now. The best case scenario for Yeo in terms of actual production on the court this year is that he plays himself into a bigger role as the year goes on. We'll talk about this more in the third and final segment of the show, but I think right now he's 10. 10 out of 10, basically, in terms of players who are going to play legitimate minutes this season. But in the best case scenario, by the end of the year, this is the best case scenario for Yeo specifically, is that by the end of the year, he's maybe seventh, eighth, somewhere in there. He is demonstrating enough on the court, and that growth and development that we feel like we need to see from him is happening at an accelerated pace. And by the end of the year, he's valuable enough to play legitimate minutes, not just in blowouts, not just in the second half of the second half, but he's actually playing regular minutes for Gonzaga. What are the worst case scenarios for Jun Seok Yeo? Well, again, a lot of it is maybe stuff we won't see. It's that the development behind the scenes is not happening at the rate that Mark Few expected, that Yeo expected, that the rest of the development staff expected. That maybe he is just not processing the game at this level the way that there was hope that he would. And I don't know if we would ever necessarily see that. I think there have been players, international players, who have come to Gonzaga with fairly high expectations who never cracked the rotation. In part because presumably the things that the staff expected or hoped would happen to them behind the scenes just never did. And in the worst case scenario for Yeo, that is the case. And again, we won't know all that at the end of this year. The worst case scenario in terms of things we might see this year are that growth in terms of his comfort on the floor, his decision-making with the basketball, his understanding of his role and where to be doesn't really happen. Either because he's not playing enough or just because he needs more time. So, a game in November against Jackson State or whomever, where he gets to play 8 minutes and you see, oh, wow, he took some good shots, but he also was kind of out of position a lot and looked lost defensively. The worst case scenario is that when he plays against Pacific or San Diego in late February, that he looks the same. We're not going to know whether the best case scenario, the worst case scenario really happened until we see how much of that behind the scenes stuff really kind of comes to fruition. And I think that's generally true. I also think that the fact that we didn't see his playing time, certainly the best case scenario of him moving from 10th in the rotation to 7th in the rotation, that obviously did not happen. And we didn't see his playing time increase as the year went on. We saw it kind of stagnate and then go down a little bit. I know there was a lot of conversation on like our Discord channel and on Zag Twitter and every other places where we kind of had conversations during the season about like, is Yeo going to play more? Why haven't we seen him play more? And I think that kind of tells you that maybe the development wasn't where the Zags wanted it to be. And that doesn't mean that he was behind. That doesn't mean that there's like frustration or anything like that. It just means that what he needed to do to get on the floor consistently wasn't happening. And that doesn't mean that the development, again, was stagnant or stalled out or anything like that. It could have just been as simple as, hey, Ben Gregg fits the better role right now. And then the switch to the starting lineup, bringing Dusty Stromer off the bench, like all that worked. I mean, there's no debate about what happened in the second half of the season, and I don't think that Yeo's minutes dropping slightly from the beginning of the year to the end of the year is really is indicative of, Gonzaga got better because of that. I don't think those things are necessarily related. Gonzaga got better because Graham Ike and Ryan Nembhard found their roles. Nolan Hickman stepped up. The switch of Ben Gregg and Dusty Stromer, things we've talked about a handful of times on the podcast. Not incredibly relevant to that. But I do wonder, how much of the development that Mark Few and the Zags wanted to see from him, how much of that did we get? Because we saw decision-making questions, which is what we expected coming into the year. We expected to see him take shots he shouldn't take and be in bad positions defensively at times. And because the playing time in the second half of the year was just so inconsistent, it was hard for us to really gauge whether that improved or not. We saw glimpses of great stuff from Yeo this year. We saw times where he made fantastic decisions, looked off defenders, took open threes, drove to the basket. He made some great passes at times. A lot of his damage came early in the year against pretty bad opponents, teams like Eastern Oregon or Arkansas, Pine Bluff, and teams like that. But we saw the potential. We saw that. And while we didn't see it kind of grow throughout the year, that doesn't mean that it wasn't happening. That doesn't mean that growth, that development that we kind of talked about being behind the scenes, it still could have happened. And it could have happened while Mark Few also decided, hey, this team is better with this 8-man rotation, this 7-man rotation, with Braden Huff taking these minutes and Stromer taking these minutes and Yeo not being a part of that. It's still, again, we didn't get the best case scenario because Yeo didn't definitively, demonstrably prove that he deserves more playing time this season for Gonzaga. He didn't prove that. And now, when you look at what the worst case scenarios were, it was wondering whether he's going to be able to be a contributor in the following season. And that's where we're at, because right now we don't know if Jun Seok Yeo is going to be a contributor next season. The expectation right now is probably not. And I think it wasn't discussed in the worst case scenario back in November, but right now, part of the conversation around Yeo is whether he's even going to still be here. Like it's not whether he's going to have a role next year. The expectation right now is that he won't, is that he's 9th or 10th in the rotation again, heading into next season. And that's less about him failing to develop and more about Gonzaga's only losing one player in Anton Watson, and they've already made a big addition in Michael Ajayi, and Steele Venters is going to be healthy. So unless Yeo makes a massive nuclear jump to be as valuable or more valuable to the team as those guys, that he's not going to be in the rotation. I think that that's generally a safe expectation right now, is that Yeo's not a part of Gonzaga's 7-8, even if it were a 9-man rotation next year. But what does that mean for him? And again, what does that mean in terms of the growth and the development? Because it took Rui a couple of years. It took guys like, Joel Ajayi didn't play much, and he didn't play at all his first year. He didn't play much in his second year. And those guys still developed and still became key contributors. But as we mentioned, like, you also have your Martinez Arlauskases or your Pavel Zakharovs, or guys who never develop into rotation players. And kind of what we talked about in that best worst case scenario is, at the end of the year, do we feel like Yeo is more on the trajectory of a Rui, where you're expecting that big explosion in a year or two? Or is he more on the trajectory of, hey, we're not sure if this guy's even going to stick around in the program? And I think pretty definitively that is the spot that we're at. That doesn't necessarily mean that things went completely awry for Yeo, but they didn't go nearly to that best case scenario. I think it's very obvious to say that. And it's more likely that they ended up in that worst case scenario. But the development could still be there. He could still be interested in staying in this program. But what I want to talk about now is the fact that, those odds to make the rotation, they are pretty slim. And what does that mean for his future? Does that mean he's sticking around? Does that mean he's potentially entering the transfer portal? Does that mean that he's potentially looking at playing professionally? We're going to talk about all of that. But first, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, GameTime. Folks, now that the NCAA tournament is over, it is time to go take in some MLB games. Maybe it's a last-minute trip up or over to Seattle to hit up a game. Great news. GameTime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. And prices on the GameTime app, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. So with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And if you ever worry about buying fake tickets, your purchase is covered by the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry at GameTime. I love having that peace of mind. So take the guesswork right out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, closing out the show and the week, continuing our season in review series episodes, talking about Jun Seok Yeo, the South Korean who had his first season in Spokane last year, first full season, I should say, playing for Gonzaga last year. What we want to do to close out the show is talk about his future. And like we talked about there in the second segment, it certainly doesn't look like Yeo is going to be a part of Gonzaga's rotation in the 2024-25 season. Right now, all expectations are that Graham Ike and Ben Gregg are starting at the 5 and the 4. You have a combination of Michael Ajayi, Steele Venters, and Dusty Stromer, who are all going to play minutes at the 3. Potentially, Michael Ajayi could play some small ball 4 minutes. You have Braden Huff coming off the bench. I'm curious how many minutes we get of Huff and Huff and Ike playing together, because Gregg's kind of the traditional power forward on the roster. And I suspect Ajayi plays some of those small ball 4 minutes, but if he does not, that does open up a potential spot at the backup 4. If Mark Few and the Zags don't feel like Ajayi or Venters or Stromer can play some small ball 4 minutes, and I would be surprised if either Venters or Stromer were kind of ID'd for that role. I don't really think either of them fit the small ball 4 role. They're more likely to play the 2 and the 3 than they are to play the 3 and the 4. Now, Ajayi, he averaged 10 rebounds per game in the WCC last year. I don't think he's going to average 10 rebounds per game at Gonzaga just because he's surrounded by different personnel, but he's obviously plays big and can play up at that 4. Gonzaga has played traditionally 6'8", 3 type players at the 4. Corey Kispert is the most notable example of that in the year that they went to the national championship. Corey Kispert played the majority of his minutes at the 4. We've seen it with Julian Strawther. He didn't do it as much as I think we kind of thought that he would, but he was capable of playing the 4 unquestionably, and he did it at times for Gonzaga. Anton Watson was kind of more of a 4 traditionally, but we kind of saw him balance playing both the 3 and the 4 as well. So that's the only role that I think you could kind of pigeonhole Yeo into, but I just, with the amount of minutes that I expect Ajayi is going to want or need, same with Venters, same with Stromer, and same with the big 3 in the front court of EK, Greg, and Huff, I'm just not sure I see a consistent role that really develops for Yeo. And if Ajayi is comfortable playing the small ball 4, that kind of takes Yeo out of the conversation for the rotation entirely. Because you got your starting 5, expected starting 5, I should say, of EK, Greg, Ajayi, Nembhard, and Hickman. That's your starting 5 right there. The rest of your rotation, Braden Huff coming off the bench, that's 6. Steele Venters and Dusty Stromer, that's 7 and 8. My mind, Luka Krajinovic currently is 9. That puts Yeo at 10. That's pretty much where Yeo was last year, the 10th man in the rotation. Being the 10th man in a rotation where Mark Few is pretty consistently placed 8 and sometimes 7, not a particularly great spot to be if you're looking for consistent minutes. So what does that mean for Yeo? I still got him ahead of the walk-ons. I still got him ahead of Pavle Stosic, but that's about it in terms of current players on the roster that he is ahead of from a playing time perspective. Now, we are in the transfer portal era, and we have seen players who were not getting playing time at Gonzaga hit the portal more. Last year in particular, we saw 3 players. And so I know that there's a lot more, I'll use the word panic, conversation, discussion, discourse around every player who's not in the rotation. Are they going to leave? And I think we need to, just kind of calm it on that. One of the things that Gonzaga and Mark Few have been very good at is getting players to buy into the developmental system at Gonzaga. And just because they've had a few players who decided not to buy into that and ultimately left doesn't mean that the system is broken or that it's not going to continue to be utilized the way that it has in the past. Braden Huff is a great example. Ben Gregg is a great example. Anton Watson is a great example. Nolan Hickman, like this team is chock full of players who have spent 2, 3, 4 years in Spokane and had their playing time gradually increase. Like they're still here. They're still doing that. So I think the automatic assumption of Yeo wasn't in the rotation last year, he's not expected to be in the rotation next year, therefore he's going to transfer. I think that is getting a little too far ahead of ourselves. I think that Jun Seok Yeo transferring is the least likely outcome out of what I perceive to be 3 specific outcomes for Yeo. Having said that, I do think that there's a possibility he does not play at Gonzaga next year. I just think that it's more likely that he decides to pursue his professional basketball playing career as opposed to entering the transfer portal. Here's the reason. Yeo's about to be 22 years old. He has not done enough in a college uniform at Gonzaga to garner a ton of attention in the transfer portal. I don't want to get fully into the weeds on this conversation. I frankly need to do a little bit more research to fully understand it, but NIL is different for international prospects. The odds of Yeo making big money playing college basketball are very slim, in part because of those rules, in part because he's not going to transfer to a Power 6 program and get a starting job and get a bunch of money. That's just not going to happen. He's probably not ready to do that for starters. And he's also, what team is going to give him that? So for him, he could enter the transfer portal and he could get some attention from some lower major schools, some other mid-major programs that might be able to promise him a little bit more playing time, but they haven't seen him. They don't have a lot of good tape on him, a lot of good film on him. So I just think that the interest for Yeo in the transfer portal, we're talking about 2,000 players are going to be in the transfer portal this year. Yeo is not going to be a hot commodity. I mean, I'm not trying to denigrate the guy, but it's just true. He just hasn't played enough, and his age and the inconsistency last year, I just don't think he's going to be a hot commodity in the transfer portal. Whereas if he were to go back home, play professionally either in South Korea or somewhere in Asia or in Europe, he's going to make money. He's He's going to be able to make money right away. He's going to be able to play professionally. And I think that might be a better fit for him than entering the transfer portal, where it's complicated as an international player. It's just more difficult. The money situation is different. Transferring credits over. I mean, he's got to transfer credits from a university in Korea, plus Gonzaga credits to go. Like, it's just a lot of messiness and complication. Like, the more I think about it, Yeo entering the transfer portal would really shock me. I've said this on the podcast before. I'll say it again. I've been shocked before. So I don't want to say that, oh, this would really surprise me, meaning there's a 0% chance it's going to happen. It could totally happen, but it would surprise me. It would surprise me more than an announcement that Yeo has decided to end his college career and go play professionally. That would surprise me less. But ultimately, of the three options that Jun Seok Yeo has, in my mind, I suppose the fourth would be like ending his career entirely, but that we don't really need to get into that. Of the three options, I think it is most likely that he remains at Gonzaga, that he comes back for next year, that he doesn't play a significant role. Hopefully, we will see growth. Growth not necessarily in the way of extended minutes. I think if Yeo's playing a much bigger role next year, there is a possibility that it's because he has developed dramatically and is just really good now. There's also a possibility it's because of an injury or a surprise departure or something like that. But ultimately, I expect that Yeo will be back for the 2024-25 college basketball season, and we will see glimpses of that growth. We will see him make better decisions with the basketball, make less mistakes. We will see him flash that facilitation skills that we saw at times last year. We'll see him shoot better than 13% from three. Maybe he attempts 30 threes instead of 22 threes, and maybe he makes 9 of them. And you're thinking, okay, he's looking a little bit more comfortable as an outside shooter. He's still driving to the basket well. We saw some really good defensive instincts from him at times last year. We also saw him standing in the completely wrong spot and having teammates grab him by the hip and direct him in the right spot. Again, this is something we used to see with Rui and Martinez and various other international players in their first season. I don't think Pavle Stosic was ever in the right position last year, and he was only playing the last 90 seconds of those games. But that's just a part of the deal with these international players, or with any freshman who's new to the system. So I think we'll see less of that next year. I think we'll see some growth at times, but ultimately, I think he's still going to be the 10th man for the Gonzaga Bulldogs next year. Could he do enough next year to put him in a position where the following year, which would be his final year of eligibility, you're a lot more excited about him? Like, he's replacing Ben Gregg, who's going to be out of eligibility, or Michael Ajayi, who's going to be out of eligibility. And you're thinking, okay, now we're feeling a little bit more confident about what he's able to bring to the table. That's probably the best case scenario, is that next year we do see enough growth that we feel more confident about his role after that. Because if he does a similar year this year, where he's playing sparingly, his minutes get cut as the year goes on, we're probably not expecting him to return for a third year after that. So that's kind of where I'm at with Yeo. I really don't expect him to transfer. I know a lot of people are kind of thinking that, but I think it's just a knee-jerk reaction to, oh, players who are in the rotation transfer. Gonzaga's got a long history of players waiting their turn and not transferring as soon as they don't get the playing time that they think they deserve, or even that we think they deserve. Just because a player didn't play as much as we thought they would doesn't mean they're all going to enter the transfer portal. And I would be surprised, because of a lot of the extenuating circumstances around Yeo's situation. It would surprise me if he were to do that. Maybe he goes back home. Maybe he goes and plays professionally somewhere. But ultimately, I think he's going to be back. And I think / hope that another year in the system, a year of actual game action, and then another offseason with this team, with the same continuity, the same players, the same system, will make him even better next year, even if he's not playing a big enough role for that to really come through. It's going to wrap it up for us today and this week here on the Locked On Zags podcast. We'll be back next week, keeping you up to date on the Kentucky coaching search, keeping you up to date on the transfer portal, recruiting for Gonzaga. We got some names, some players to discuss. We're also going to continue our season in review series as well. Zags, I hope you enjoy the weekend. Thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. And until Monday, as always, go Zags.